Hey, everybody. We are here for my first ever More Reptiles podcast with none other than guest David from Tikis Geckos. Thank you, first of all, for jumping on here with me.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man.
And second of all, the whole concept behind this first podcast is a sort of all in one spot place where you can learn and hear everything you might want to hear before you start breeding crested geckos, or some of this will apply to reptiles as well. And I figured a perfect person to talk to about this is someone who's been talking about this on YouTube for like almost a decade. And it's crazy to think about, right?
Yeah, it really is. Time flies, dude.
Yeah, it really does. And I mean, you've had Crested Gecko care videos for quite a long time. And I thought, this would be a really cool resource for people to have where they can go in. And I tried to organize everything so that we'll talk about it in the order that you would actually kind of want to learn it. And
Yeah,
somebody can watch all the way through this and be like, okay, I'm at the end of this video. Do I actually want to do this?
right, yeah.
And so I figured like one of the first things that we should actually address in this whole thing is the what does somebody not want to hear but need to hear when they're thinking about doing all of this?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think most people need to hear that this is not a lucrative business. Some people might think that, but it's not really something that you want to get into if you just have dollar signs in your mind.
Mm-hmm.
Because with animals, a lot of things can go wrong, often do go wrong. So you may be growing up an animal that you think it's perfect, and for whatever reason, just dies or just gets sick or just doesn't produce like you think it will. And, a lot of times stuff like that happens. So if you're going to do a breeding or a reptile breeding business, I would say make sure it's just purely based on passion. And oftentimes, what happens is that it starts as a hobby and it turns into a business down the line. But I always like when I see that because I know that the person is doing it, for the passion of it at first. And if it turns out into a business, is a plus versus some people that get into it to make a quick buck and then they end up getting a bunch of animals. They find out that's not what they want to do, and then they have to dump all these animals in it. It's not good for anybody.
Yeah, that's definitely huge in all of it. And like my personal experience with all of this is that I got into crested geckos back in 2016. I bought a breeding pair not to like do as a business or anything. I just thought it was cool.
Yeah,
Made a few, like had a few hatchlings and babies and stuff, grew them out. I never sold any of them. It was just like what I wanted to do for fun and still have the pair and the babies that ended up hatching out. And like now here we are, however many years later, and my buddy gets into crested geckos, and then he's got me looking at stuff, and I'm over here like, holy crap, axanthics are actually possible now.
yeah,
You could do it. And it's not just like one guy in the whole entire world who has these. And that was like my affinity at the time. So it's like, wow, I can actually do this. And so now got my own space, got a few more geckos and everything, getting into this. So it's like this podcast is even for me to learn too as getting into this stuff.
yeah.
So those are some things that people probably should hear but might not want to hear, and I agree with all of that. But like if someone hears that and they decide to keep going forward with the conversation, now maybe like what are some things that would make someone want to do this?
Well, I think the most obviously, if you have a passion for these animals, it's so rewarding to just start to. I love the breeding aspect of it. So when you start to hatch things that you had in your mind that before it was in the physical state right in front of you, it was just in your mind, and you actually just basically manifested this thing into reality with all the different patterns and colors. It just gets really fun because it's just like little pieces of living art. So especially now that we're understanding the genetics more and more every day, and we're actually starting to understand what will go well if you pair it up together, and when you do all these different morph combinations, the you know there's no limit to what we could do, and there's like endless amount of different geckos that we could create. So
Yeah, and
that's the most exciting part about it, in my opinion.
for sure. And before we started doing the recording for this, I brought up Korea, and it's like what we're seeing pop up in Korea is all this new stuff that people like the Chocho thing.
Yeah,
I didn't even know that existed until I watched that last Gecko pod with
yeah.
Anthony and Jess, and they started. She mentioned Chocho earlier, and I was like, "What the hell's a Chocho?" And then later they actually talked about him, and I was like, "Oh, so this is like totally different."
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It reminds me a little bit of the Sable.
Yeah.
And I at first I thought it was Sable, but Sanju, the guy who produced them, he started posting them, and I would see them, and they have like a little red tail, like really interesting. So it might, I wouldn't even be surprised if it's a lilac with the sables and with the cappuccinos, because it kind of does something similar where it grays out some of the orange markings, and the white markings it just expands on.
Mm.
So really interesting. I'm really, dude, like I was just saying, breeding is getting really exciting, and not just because you could produce whatever you have in your mind, but now there's new morphs coming out every so often, and it just adds to the endless array of possibilities that we could produce.
Yeah,
So,
and just the thought too, like this is skipping ahead a little bit, but just the thought of like, okay, you're doing this, and then you end up being one of the people who discovers one of these things that's never been seen before, and it's like,
oh,
whoa,
oh yeah.
can't imagine that. So I guess getting through what we talked about now, the very first thing that I felt should be part of this entire conversation is that like if you are brand new to crested geckos or reptiles in general and you want to get into breeding, what I would personally say is like you need to do as much research as you possibly can about the animal itself and the care for it before you even consider breeding anything.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. There's obviously we put out a lot of information on our YouTube channel and everything. There's a ton of other good resources out there. And something I encourage everybody to do is also just, on your weather app on your phone or whatever, just download your New Caledonia, the Noumea, which is the capital of New Caledonia, or Isle of Pines, and just see what the weather's like over there, study what the humidity's like over there, and just kind of like apply that to your care and your husbandry.
Oh, that's a really cool concept. I mean, what better to do than to just try to replicate exactly what they have?
Yeah, exactly.
That's cool. And like you were saying, your YouTube channel and there's endless resources on YouTube for care for reptiles, whether it's crested geckos or any other type of reptile. Like the care for it is out there and you can find anything you would need to know. And I feel like before you're gonna be a breeder of anything, you should be a master of just keeping it.
Yeah, absolutely. Before anybody breeds anything or thinks about breeding, you should own some, at least, a couple as pets, and see how it goes from there. Because ultimately, if you could keep a crested gecko or a gargoyle gecko alive and they're thriving, then that animal is going to be able to breed, and you're going to do good for the most part.
Yep, that makes total sense. I just felt like that was like a disclaimer type thing. You almost before you even get to the breeding side, like you should be able to take care of it. Uh, but when it comes to the breeding side of things too, I feel like people should know what they're even getting in for because there's a lot of stuff that you'd never even consider or be able to find out about without doing a bunch of research or experiencing it. So like for you, what would you say that someone's getting in for if they decide to jump in on breeding?
So one of the biggest things is that at first, when you first start breeding, geckos or any reptile really, nobody's going to know who you are. So you're not going to be selling animals left and right. So you have to be prepared to house the animals that sell none. If you weren't to sell any of them, you should be prepared to house all of these animals. You can't think like, okay, I have two enclosures and I'll sell these two babies, and then by the time next babies hatch, these will be gone. And it's not like that. Sometimes, especially like this year, it's been really slow. It's been slower than most years. So a lot of breeders have held back, have been forced to hold back a lot of the animals they produce because they're not just selling like they used to. So you need to be aware of that. It's a problem that, every breeder is dealing with right now. And it's something that people don't really think about when they're getting into breeding. They're thinking, okay, I'm going to sell these two, then too much more hatch, and so on and so on. But it's not like that. You might hatch 12 before you sell your first, especially if you're starting out, because nobody's going to know you, nobody's going to trust you. And because nobody's going to know you, or because these are your first animals, you might not necessarily have the highest quality animals in the beginning, because who's going to spend $2,500 on their first geckos? Not many people, right?
Listen, you're not
So,
looking at me. I definitely didn't do that.
yeah, well, some people, know what they want.
Yeah,
But like the average person isn't going to do that, and
right.
it's a little bit tougher to sell normal looking geckos, even though they might be cheaper.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was one eye-opening experience for me going to a bigger reptile show for the first time recently. It was like because I had already bought a 100% het axanthic, and I was like, all right, I'll go to this show and I'll buy another. I'll buy the female, and then I'll have the pair, and we'll be good. I go there and I start looking around. I was like, there's not a single person at this show who's got a at axanthic. All of these geckos are $1,000 or under, and there's a lot of normal ones that people are selling because people are selling to like your average consumer who's going to the reptile show. And it made
Yeah,
me realize that like when you're getting into something like that, you're getting into a different audience for who's even going to be buying these from you.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So there's the commitment of caring for these animals if you don't sell them, or in general caring for the adults that you're keeping. What about like the time commitment that you have if you're going to be breeding?
Yeah, that's a very good point. There's always, with any animal that you keep, there's going to be a time commitment. I will say that reptiles in general are very easy to maintain. They're not going to require as much attention as a dog,
Yeah.
Uh, so it is a time commitment, but it's very manageable. So most reptiles don't need to be fed every single day. They don't need to be like checked, all the time. They don't need attention from you. So it's very convenient for us. And I always say like right now we have a puppy that's, very young. So like one puppy is like the equivalent to like 250 geckos. Constant work, like every day you gotta, you know, put so much time for it. So it's funny. It could definitely add up, but especially if you're starting out and you have that many animals, it's very manageable. So
Yeah. So the time isn't too bad, but what about like the cost when you're getting into this? I feel like the cost is probably even more of uh kind of an investment than the time is at first.
yeah, well, so let's say we're talking about crested geckos,
Yep.
right? The
Yep.
cost is quite high because the animals could be quite expensive, especially if you are deciding to get into high-end animals. But after you get that initial cost out of the way with the enclosures and the animals and all that, the maintenance, the month to month cost is going to be relatively low. These animals don't require much. If you're breeding them and you want to be profitable, there's, you know, I mean, you don't need to provide UVB light, or heating or anything like that. So it's unlike a lot of other reptiles where they're going to have a high overhead just because of the electric bill. uh, and the food cost, because they're geckos and their metabolism's a little bit slower. They're not going to eat as often as like a bearded dragon or a, a little monitor or something. So it's quite, the cost is quite low, which is good, right? Because if you're breeding them as a business, it's going to be, you want the cost to be as low as possible, but at the same time maintaining the quality of life for these animals.
Yeah, absolutely. And it all makes sense. Crested geckos specifically too. Everybody talks about how easy they can be, especially when you're small. I can imagine, if somebody was to look at like what you have going on and think about getting into something like that right away, it's like that's a huge cost of investment.
Yeah, of course. And I don't recommend anybody doing that, because what people have to take in consideration is that you look at me today and I have, a big facility, I have so many geckos and all this, but I've been doing this since I was like 14 years old or something, and I'm 30 years old now. So I've had my time, I've paid my dues, I've earned my stripes in this, and there's still a lot to learn, but my point is, like, I've grown slowly and I've been able to kind of adapt to each stage of the growth. If you go in and you haven't really kept or bred crested geckos before, and you right off the bat get 500 adults, you might have some issues, and the issues are going to cost you, because you learn things when you're keeping these animals in a smaller scale that transfer over to the bigger scale. And if you don't get through that in the beginning, it's like a train wreck waiting to happen.
It makes total sense. So, do you think there's anything else like initially to talk about as far as like what someone's getting in for they should kind of know about?
Yeah, I mean, don't my what I always tell people is, don't look for what's hot or what is like you're gonna be most what's gonna be most profitable. What more if it's selling the highest price or whatever, because that's not always, the market changes so often, and what's selling today for $300 was selling 10 years ago for $80, and was selling, that long ago for $350 is selling for $80 today. So it's cyclical. Once there's, once there's low supply of whatever, more people start to gravitate towards it because it's rare, and then it goes on and on and on. So I always tell people, go with what you truly like, because you're going to put in the most effort to try to, further that project and further that more for species or whatever you're working with.
That, oh, for sure. And I think that leads perfectly into the next thing that I want to talk about in all of this is like, okay, so now we've covered a lot of these bases. You've learned a lot of what you should learn. You know what it takes, kind of. You get an idea of what you're committing to. Now you get to like, well, where do we go from here? What do I want? So there's the idea of the genetics of things too, and that's kind of another topic to learn about in all of this because you feel like you need to understand the genetics a little bit to understand what you want and can even do.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. I think it's important to have a base understanding of the genetics, but don't let that, like, don't wait until you understand it 100% before you start getting animals that you're interested in, because quite frankly, things change and things, evolve so frequently that you might learn something today, and then tomorrow it's like, oh no, this is actually not how we thought it was, it's a different way. And at the end of the day, you want to get your time in working with these animals. So a lot of times, the the base understanding of how genetics work, how recessive genes work, how incomplete dominant work, and how they get passed down and all that, that's all important, that's a must know. But when I started, I didn't know any of that.
Mm-hmm.
I've learned that as I've gone, and through experience, and obviously through just talking to more breeders and just my time in this hobby. But it's really important to try to understand it, but at the same time, just start working with what you like, and start understanding it from your own experience and as you go.
I would definitely agree with that, just in the sense too that like I was in one of those groups on Facebook where it was like Crested Gecko pairing advice, whatever. And it was just because my buddy invited me to it on Facebook, and I was like, sure, why not? And then every day I'm seeing just pop up when I'm scrolling through Facebook is like, what do you think about this one and this one? And then there's the same six people who are like, I wouldn't do that because it'll make a muddy base and this and that. I was just like, I finally just had to leave.
So yeah, good. Good thing you bring that up, because one thing I meant to say earlier when when we were talking about doing your research and everything is that Facebook and Reddit are like not where you want to get your information from, because there's so many different opinions. People are pulling you in so many different directions, and they'll crucify you if you even think about something that they think is wrong. So definitely, and what happens too is that kind of thought process kind of like puts people in this box, and
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the coolest geckos you will ever see come from pairings that don't make sense in the traditional way that people think they do. So if you sometimes maybe it's a little bit of naiveness or inexperience that guides you to pairing two geckos that don't look anything alike together, but sometimes those animals produce something really outstanding or something really unique, and then it could you could run with that. So I don't think that is a just don't listen to people when it comes to the art of it. I call this like living art, and you're the artist, so you could decide what you want to put together. And if you have that base understanding of the morphs and the genetics, then you could take that and use that, and you could say, well, this will pair together well, or this should pair together well, or this shouldn't, but let's find out and let's experiment. At the end of the day, a lot of what we're doing here is experimenting with the morphs and the colors and everything.
Yeah, and you see all the time when people are talking about a gecko that they're putting on social media or wherever, they're saying, I put it with, I had this pairing and I had no idea what to expect, or I didn't expect something like this, and then this happened and it was crazy. And yeah. So to go along with everything you're saying too, a great place where you can listen and learn a little bit about the genetics and the way they work is your podcast with Tom and the Little Monsters guy. Is Anthony? Is that
Yeah, Anthony and
Tom?
Jessica.
So I can't, I think she was there too. So I think it was those three in a hotel
Yeah,
room. That podcast,
yeah,
it helped me understand things in a way that, because I watched the Pangea one first with
yeah,
Tom and Anthony, and I was like, I have no idea what I'm listening to right now.
yeah.
Then you got in there with them, and I was like, oh my god, he's having them explain this in a way that normal people can understand without knowledge of this stuff, and
That was that was my whole point with those. So I'm glad that helped.
it was perfect. And so there's that. And then once you watch that one, you can jump to the Pangea one and the Gecko Pod stuff too with those guys and anything else out there, because I feel like yours with them is like a primer for, okay, I get the basics. Now I can jump in and have a little bit of understanding what they're saying.
And I know we're talking mostly about crested geckos here, but I also did a podcast with Paul Murlock and Kelly. It was like a gargle gecko podcast, but you could learn a lot from that podcast as well, and how we keep them and genetics and everything. So that's also a good podcast to listen to.
Cool. Is that on your channel?
Also on my channel, yes.
Cool. I will have to listen to that one as well then. Uh, cool. So I definitely skipped one thing in here just in talking about the commitment of stuff. I wanted to dive a little bit deeper into the time needs for these things because I think there is a couple time aspects that people might not consider. So we talked about daily care and things like that. Not so bad when you're small, it grows, the more animals you get, the more time it takes. But there's one thing too that I considered in this too is the time of, you got to take pictures of these animals when you're going to post them, vending shows when you get into that, and everything that comes with that, just posting on social media, like all of that stuff takes time, and it's a commitment to be aware of.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's a full-time job for us. This is what we do full time. So, I mean, I could tell you I work, upwards of 60 hours a week on this stuff. But it's also because this is what I like to do, and this is one of the only things I really care about. So that's why I do it. But, it could be couple hours a week. You do have to set time aside for social media if you want to be serious about this, and you want to really grow your breeder business. Then you do have to put some serious time into this. It's not just watering and feeding your animals. There's a lot more that goes into it. Marketing, reptile shows, like you said, and all sorts of things. So it's something to think about as well.
Yes. And, I think a really important consideration anyone who's considering this could take is what you just said. This is your full time job. So, what you're thinking about getting into with this is somebody else's full time job. So, like, if it's someone's full time job, it's going to take some time, and you should just be aware that you're what you're committing to, basically.
Yeah.
And this isn't to like try and push anyone away. I kind of just wanted to get all of the like realities of it because I feel like it's really exciting to think about breeding crested geckos or breeding reptiles. But then, it's also really easy to put rose colored glasses on and just jump, head first into it. And then you realize, like what you were saying, like a couple months go by, you have all these animals, and then realize, oh, wait, I don't want to do this.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of just what I wanted to talk about time wise. Um, and then I hate to bring up the bad stuff again, but there is a couple of specifics I feel like people should just know about that maybe you don't think about. That's what I was saying too just now. Like things like babies not making it out of the eggs. That's a reality you have to deal with. Not being able to sell the babies. Things not working out exactly the way that you hope they would, or uh, planning for care when you're not there, where you go on vacation, or anything like that.
Yeah, that's a good point. So when it comes to I don't really take vacations that are longer than 3 days. I
Mm-hmm.
try more than 3 days, and if I do, maybe 4 days or 5 days on the absolute max. And I get count on two fingers how many of those vacations I've taken over the past couple of years. But I make sure somebody's here. I have employees, so they're here, they're taking care of the animals. But if it was just me, like it has been in the past, can't really take vacations. You could reptiles will be fine for 2 days, 3 days without food. But for the most part, you want to be here, because you want to watch over your animals, and sometimes things go wrong, and you don't want to be out of town when that happens. But some other, things that happen just because of the nature of the business is, like you said, babies don't make it out of the egg, or animals get injured while breeding. You have to take animals to the vet. You can see I've seen some pretty bad injuries on my geckos and other animals. I mean, you name it. If if there's an injury out there that is likely to happen, it will happen eventually. So you have to be prepared for that. You have to have a good vet at hand, and you're gonna have to learn to some extent some of the veterinarian practices that they do. And every time I go to the vet, I ask a lot of questions and they teach me a lot. So, next time something comes up, maybe you could treat it at home if it's not that serious. But those type of things are always going to happen. You're not going to get away from that. Animals are going to get sick. Animals are going to have prolapse hemipenes or breeding injuries, or just things are going to go wrong. It's for sure.
Yeah. And so another thing I had too is so what do you do when something does go wrong? Like where can you go for help when something goes wrong? Who do you ask?
So depends on what it is. If it's something like like a really big injury, or an animal sick and it's like losing weight, it has diarrhea and you don't know what's going on, then you're gonna have to take it to a vet. If it's something more simple, like a prolapse hemipene is pretty, there's a lot of home remedies that you could do for them. You could ask other breeders. You could, if there's, if it's just like animals aren't pairing well, they're having a lot of fighting issues, you could ask, local breeders. Typically what I tell people to do is ask the breeder that you got your animals from,
Mm.
because those guys are, at least we always take care of our customers if they have any questions. Like, we have customers that they bought one gecko, I don't know, 7 years ago, and they'll contact us about anything, and we're always there to help. And even people that aren't my customers, I help. But the point is, like, if you're buying, buying an animal from somebody, that person should give you their time, and should help you out if you need it.
Yeah. That's great answer. Great answer. So, I think we've gotten through the informational stuff. Now I'm calling this the fun part because this is what I thought would be fun. Like everything up to this point feels like the we got to go to school and we got to learn.
Yeah.
Now, so I kind of thought that it would be fun to ask you the question if you were starting over from nothing today, but you know everything that you know currently, how would you approach it?
Oh, so I would have a project in mind. Like, I would have a project that I want to do. Let's say it's tricolors, right? And I would pick from the highest quality tricolors I could. So I would hit up the nicest tricolors out there. I would try to get offspring from those animals, and that's how I. The best way to do it is to get babies, right?
Mm,
Because nobody's gonna sell you their nicest adults.
yeah.
That's just the reality of things. If they have a killer adult, they're gonna keep it back and breed it. And if they sell it, you need to be wary of that, because sometimes, not all the time, sometimes people are getting out of the hobby or they just need the money or whatever. But sometimes people sell adult animals that are like, maybe they're not the best producers. Like, if it's like a stellar animal and they're selling it, just, ask questions, and
Yeah.
hopefully you're with somebody that's honest. But I would have in mind a project that I want to do. And now that I have a better understanding of the genetics, it'd be easier to navigate and you wouldn't have to run into so many dead ends, right?
Yeah.
So if you wanted to do phantom, or a great example is those those red phantoms that have a bunch of white portholes on the side,
Hmm.
right? So before, I didn't know how people were making them, and I thought it was just like a line breeding thing. And I'm like, wow, that's so cool. Like, I wish I could make those, but I thought I had to buy into those animals, like basically get those animals to start producing them, right?
Yeah.
But if you understand genetics, you understand that phantom is a recessive gene, right? So you could buy animals that are not phantom, but that are het phantom. All they need is at least one parent to be a phantom animal, and then even if the offspring is not a phantom, they're going to carry that gene,
Yeah.
right? So I would say, okay, this is literally what I did, because I want to make those animals, and I've already made some babies. You have to grow them up to see how much white they're going to get, right? But so what you need is those animals, you know that they carry phantom gene or they're actual phantoms. And you also need white spot animals. The orange pattern, so there's orange pattern and there's white pattern.
Yeah.
The orange pattern gets eaten up by the phantom.
Mm.
Same with cappuccinos. So cappuccinos fade the orange pattern, Axanthics fade the orange pattern, and phantoms fade the orange pattern where you can't see it, right? It mutes it, it covers it. But with the white pattern and the snowflake and the white spot trait, it goes through the phantom gene. So it sits on top of the phantom. So that's how they do that. So what I did was I bought a bunch of really nice white spot harlequin, uh, red harlequin animals that I know are het phantom, and I've made some baby phantoms that have some portholes and some white spots on the side that as they grow it's going to start to develop more. But that was an animal, that's just an example of something that I thought, I didn't understand how they were making them. And I thought to make them, I just had to buy that same
Mm.
exact phenotype. And you don't have to do that. There's ways around it.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's a cool thought to it. And I thought another fun way to kind of think about this topic is to to break it up into like budget tiers. If you're trying to do this and you're starting a little bit more on a budget, you already mentioned, buying babies. Buying babies is always, not always, usually less expensive too than buying, a sub-adult or a juvenile.
Yeah.
And so you can start there. You buy babies from, whatever you can afford in that mindset. Uh, but let's just say you have an unlimited budget and you're getting into this. How would you go about that?
Oof, an unlimited budget.
Yeah.
So if I have to care about money,
Nope, you can do whatever you want.
I would definitely I would try to get all the new Moors, and especially if they've already been combined with each other. So, for example, like a a Xanthic lily white or a sable lily white, frappuccino, and
Mm-hmm.
then put frappuccinos with Axanthics and make frappuccinos het Axanthics, and then breed those back to the Axanthics and see what the hell comes out. Right? We don't
Yeah,
know what. I don't think anybody's done them yet. I know there's been one guy in Korea that I've seen that have hatched Axanthic cappuccinos,
I saw that too.
but I don't think we've seen a Axanthic Frappuccino yet or an Axanthic Sable Lily White yet, right? So I would just try to be ahead of everybody else. If I had an endless amount of money, I'd just buy the most expensive, beautiful geckos, and of course all the new morphs. I would get the leucistic gecko, uh, and see if you can make some really cool combos with them. But another thing that's important is not just breeding for morphs, but breeding for high quality
Mm-hmm.
examples of those morphs. Because what happened with the Axanthics for so long is that people were just trying to pop out Axanthics. They didn't care how they looked, they just wanted an Axanthic, right? But moving forward, I think what's going to set people apart is those that don't just try to hatch an Axanthic, but they try to hatch the best example of an Axanthic possible.
Yeah.
So we were just talking about the orange patterns on Axanthics, it gets muted out, but the white pattern sticks, right? So you breed the highest white het Axanthics to Axanthics possible, and you're going to produce some Axanthics that have some white laterals, some white dorsals, and you could go from there and so on and so on. So my what I would do is I would just invest in the highest quality animals possible, and I would try to make morph combos with the highest quality possible.
I think that's a sound approach and it makes sense. I figured since I'm kind of in the middle of this, I could give what I've done and in the middle of doing. Because at first I was just excited and I was just like, all right, we're just gonna go for it, everything's cool. And then I started learning more and more. So, like I bought a fully adult, ready to breed 100% het Axanthic male. And And then I was on the hunt for a female, and I found a female. And my ultimate goal was to make axanthic lily whites because I love that look. And like back in 2016, I hunted down the pair of geckos that was as gray as it could possibly be because I wanted axanthic, but nobody except Brian had them at that point. And so
Yeah.
I was like, well, now it's possible, so I'm gonna do it. And and so I figured, okay, I can't afford to buy the lily white hets that are out there. They're they're just too expensive for me to be able to do this. So I'll buy babies. And so I figured while I wait for the babies to grow out, I'll try and find a adult sized pair to make axanthics in the process. And then eventually I'll be able to make lily white axanthics. And so that was kind of my approach to that. I was like, okay, since I can't do what I want to do, I'll do the building blocks for it and try and build my way up to it. So like what you're saying is like you make the best animals you can
Yeah.
with that. And then I also realized too that like back in 2016, I bought this uh, extreme harlequin male, red extreme harlequin. He's super white. Like when I was looking at him today and comparing some lily whites, I was like, this thing has way more white on it than I ever realized.
Yeah.
So I bought a yellow lily white female for him because I was like, why would I not? I wasn't gonna do anything with him, but I was like, why would I not?
Yeah.
So I figured I'll get something. I have an adult. Why wouldn't I buy an adult so that I could do something in the meantime while I'm waiting for my ultimate goal?
Right.
And basically, I guess my approach has been I don't have an unlimited budget. I don't have a ton of money to go towards this stuff, but I still have goals. So I'm trying to be as selective as possible on what
Yeah.
I'm doing so that I can reach the goals just maybe not as fast as I could if I had that unlimited budget.
Yeah. And it goes back to what I was saying earlier with, you know, making certain phenotypes. Phenotype, by the way, is just like what what you see on the gecko,
Yep.
right? The phenotype is like the morph, right? What you see when you're looking at a gecko.
Yep.
But so if you don't have the money to buy a lily white axanthic, you can buy the ingredients to eventually make that, and it's going to come out a lot cheaper that way.
Yeah.
Because most of us don't have an unlimited budget, right? So
Right.
it's the most effective. It might not be the most effective way to do it, but it's definitely the most affordable way to do it, and it's the most realistic for some people.
Yeah, it's basically you're trading, less money for more time you have to put into it.
Yeah.
Because what I bought was I saw one of the original pages that I followed on Facebook was doing wholesaling. So, and I saw that they had some axanthic stuff they were doing. So I just was like, hey, do you have any lily white hets? They're like, oh, I don't have this, but I'm wholesaling 50% hets. So I just bought 50% hets. And I'm like, the chances of one of those being actually a het and proving out, like, I would have to be really unlucky.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I in my eyes too, like we talked about earlier, I was like, I like these things so much that even if none of them sell, I'm not gonna be sad because I'm
Yeah.
just gonna have a bunch of geckos. It's gonna be cool. So yeah, that's kind of the way I looked at it. But uh, to keep moving forward in the conversation, we talk about your approach, a little bit of what I'm doing too, and if somebody's actually going to get started to do this, um, my next note here is so you've learned the care for this, so you know how many you want to buy. You bought your enclosures. You're ready for geckos. How how do you pick what you want to buy?
Whatever you like.
Exactly. We kind of already talked about it, but
Yeah.
I'm trying to follow my notes.
Mhm.
So yeah, whatever you like. You figure out. I feel like you want to set a goal. Is that like
Yeah. If you're trying to breed, look at what you like the best, and then talk to breeders and show them what you like the best, and see how you could get there.
Mm,
Because sometimes you might see babies, especially with newer people. You'll see a baby and you're like, wait, that's not what I like, and we're gonna tell you, no, it actually is. It just looks like that as a baby, you
yes,
know.
absolutely. And I think too, a good thing that I just realized would make sense too is for picking what you'd want to buy and what you're going to make, pick the ones that when they reproduce, you wouldn't be upset if you had to keep them all because no one wanted to buy one.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, and then, just like with the care thing, research, learning about genetics. The more you learn about the genetics, the easier it becomes to figure out, like through the sea of what's available out there, what to hone in on actually buying.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I feel like Tom from Geckological, that guy, I
Hmm.
mean, he just seems like he's the most knowledgeable person out there when it comes to genetics.
Yeah, he's very knowledgeable. Tom, Anthony and Jessica are they're very dialed in on their research, and they've done a ton of work with the foundation genetics. So if you're looking to learn about the different genetics in crested geckos, I would definitely say check that out. Just go to foundation genetics or little monster lm reptiles.com. I
Yep.
think that's their website. And then look up their foundation genetics page. It breaks down every single morph. It tells you what it is, the inheritance, and all that.
Yeah, I found that page, and the first time I looked at it, I was just completely overwhelmed.
Yeah, there's it's a lot of information, and I you got to go about it by sections. I feel like you get there's even like the history of the Morse, and like there's just so much information on there, but it's definitely something that you want to have in your back pocket as a breeder.
Absolutely. And the more that I learn, the easier it gets because you kind of know what you're looking for when you go into there. And one thing that's really, really awesome about that whole guide is that you go to a specific trait and you see it, for example, let's just say axanthic. You scroll down to the axanthic page and then it has with pinstripe, with lily white, and it shows potential things that are examples of if you put axanthic with this, it could make something like this.
Hmm.
Yeah, and one approach that I figured out too is that you can look at different breeders and see babies and see what they came from. And if you go and you find where they came from, you can get an idea, okay, this and this made this. Now I can use that as a kind of a guide for if I want to make that, here's what I need to do it.
Yeah, exactly. Especially if it's if the parents are have a consistent look and they're both similar, then you could almost certainly bet that that baby is going to look somewhat like the parents, right? So you want to, if you like the parents and you buy the baby, and the baby might not look like the parents yet, but you have that, that trust in the lineage, and that it's going to eventually look like that.
Yeah. So how do you go about deciding what to pair?
So I pair, it depends on the project, right? So I will typically, it just depends on which way I want to take the project. So for example, now with like cappuccinos, I'm trying to make really really dark base cappuccinos, and I'm gonna use those cappuccinos to pair into some of my Halloween stuff. I want to pair into high white stuff because I want that really dark contrast, that really dark base and that really bright white. So for the cappuccinos, that is for the Dalmatians, Super Dalmatians. I want orange base Super Dalmatians. So I'll pair my all my super Dalmatians to either red. I'll do red to yellow. Uh, it just depends on the project, but I tend to like to refine on a certain look. So if I have a look like pinstripes, for example, and if you have a pinstripe, right, and it has the lateral stripe on the side where it makes like, where it's like the quad stripe. If it's a little bit jagged, you might want to make it straighter. So you got to breed quad stripes together, and then whatever babies you get that have the straightest sides possible, then you hold that back and you use it for the project later on. Things like that. I try to refine on each individual project that I have. So whatever the goal is, just double down on that particular look and hold back the best offspring and then breed back into the project.
Yeah, it's an interesting approach to it, and just this. I mean, you can see it in your animals the refinement and like getting better over time.
Yeah.
It's awesome. So, at this point in someone's journey, we assume they have animals now and they're ready to breed. And I mean, this is kind of the same as the care thing. There's a million videos on YouTube about how to breed.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's one of those things like, and I feel like it's so simple too, just in that like you watch one of those videos and you kind of almost know a lot of what you need to know to get started with it because of how simple it is.
Yeah, exactly. I think what people need to do is you need to decide what you want to do. Are you going to do this as a hobby and you want to set up a really beautiful vivarium that you're going to have fun looking at, or do you want to do this as a business, which entails, maybe not having the beautiful flashy vivarium. You're going to have simple enclosures that are still going to meet all the requirements of your animals, but they're not going to be like a display piece in your home, right? So you got to decide, what do you want to do? Do you want to be a hobby breeder and just produce some animals on the side and just have fun with it, which is what most people do? Or do you want to be a professional breeder and a business where you're still going to take care of all the requirements that the animal needs, but you're going to do it in a different way that might not look that visually appealing, right? Because one is going to cost significantly less than the other.
Yeah.
And if I'm being honest, the most fun is to do it with the vivarium, and sometimes babies will hatch in there, and it's cool to see that and everything. But if you want to have a profitable business, you can't afford to do that for all the geckos you breed.
Yeah, I feel like there's probably a line where it makes sense to do that. And then once you get past a certain point, it's like it gets tougher and tougher and tougher.
Yeah, like if you have 10 geckos, you could do that, no problem. But if you have 600 geckos, you're going to need a different type of system, right?
Yeah, it makes sense. It definitely makes sense. So so you're breeding the geckos at this point. You figured it all out. You got a breeding pair. You've got laying eggs and everything. I guess the next thing is incubating. Should be part of the videos about breeding. Once again, it feels like such a simple thing with how easy it is to do it with crested geckos specifically, like compared to other species of reptiles.
Yeah, yeah, just because you incubate them, you can incubate them at room temperature. The same temperature that you keep your geckos at, you could just basically leave the eggs there and eventually they will hatch. That's what we do. We incubate everything at room temperature just because we have known of so many breeders that will have a like a incubation um, little cooler or something, uh, or the incubator just malfunctions. It gets super hot and it kills every single egg in there. That
Sucks.
happens more often than not, and those incubators aren't the best sometimes. So you just want to like reduce that type of risk.
And I can't even imagine. Like, can you imagine just you walk into your room one day and you look in there and it's like hot to the touch?
Yeah, trust me, I know people that have lost hundreds of thousands of dollars of
Oh, that sucks.
animals because of those incubators.
Man, that's rough.
Yeah.
And I guess to pivot off of that, because that's depressing to think about. Uh, Once you incubate, then, you know, months later, you've got hatchlings and you've got to care for these hatchlings. And at that point, I mean, you're back to the beginning kind of because you're back to the care. The videos you already watched about care.
Right. Yeah, the babies are gonna be, basically the same type of care as an adult. There's a little bit more, you know, there's a smaller margin for error with the babies because they could dehydrate quicker, and they're prone to having shedding issues if you don't have your humidity dialed in.
Mm,
But once you get, that's why I always say, start off small, get a couple of breeders, hatch out some babies, grow those babies out, see how that process goes. Because if you hatch out babies and your two first babies, you're having shedding issues and all sorts of things, it's easier to deal with that than dealing with 100 babies that just hatched because you decided to go big or go home, right?
yeah,
So definitely, there's a there is a benefit in starting off small because your errors aren't going to be as they're not going to break your heart as much.
yeah, makes sense. And it's one of those things where you get to learn it by experience that way and just doing it.
Yeah, and everybody's houses are different. Everybody lives in a different type of area. So what I do here in Florida in my shed might be different than what you do in Ohio. So if I may spray every single day, or maybe you spray every single day and I don't need to spray every single day. So a lot of people will tell you online, oh, spray them once a day. But they don't take in consideration the type of enclosure you're keeping them in, or the size of the animal, or just the ventilation in the enclosure. And that is what gives a lot of people problems, is because you can't spray an animal the same way on a tub than you
Right,
do on an exoterra.
right,
You can't treat an animal the same way that I do here in my place, the same way you would in Ohio, because my humidity is a lot higher than yours.
right.
So it's something to keep in mind, that you want take in all the information that you hear, but be very careful and don't die by what people are telling you online. Experiment. It's good to have a good foundation of basic care, but you're also gonna have to make little tweaks depending on where you live and how you keep your animals.
That makes sense for sure. And I've experienced the difference in the tub and the Exoterra firsthand and learning it firsthand, just in that you notice, with the tub, if you spray it too much and you come back the next day, it's way too wet still.
You know?
So that's always fun whenever I would go on like a BMX trip and I gotta explain to whoever's coming over, like, these ones you don't spray as long. It's like 2 seconds on this one, and this one
Yeah,
it's like 10 seconds.
yeah, exactly.
But it makes sense. So, all right, we've gotten all the way to hatchlings. We've got hatchlings now. We're breeders. We made babies. Now what? How do you even go about beginning to sell these?
So there's a couple different options nowadays. I feel like it's easier for people because we have Morph Market, and in Morph Market, your ad is going to be right there next to mine.
Yeah,
I I have a lot more experience, but if you just started and you just have create a Morph Market account, you have the ability to put your ad up there next to mine. So that's going to be a really good tool to use to sell. Another really good tool is, you might need to work on the amount of animals that you have, but it's doing reptile shows. So you could get a table at a reptile show, and it's a good way to sell because you could actually get these animals in the hands of people. Most people, when especially the people that have no clue what a crested gecko is, when they hold one for the first time, is what does it for them. So reptile shows, morph market, or when you're starting off, this is your friends. I have so many friends. Virtually all my friends got crested geckos at some point from me, just because they would come over or something, and I let them hold them, and they're like, "Oh, this is so cool! It's so easy to keep," and it's almost like a fish tank, but way better because it's more interactive and it's less work that you have to put into it. So a lot of people are open to the idea of having a little piece of New Caledonia in their living room, and having a really cool uh, display piece on their home.
Yeah, what you can do with the enclosures is just the range of things you can do. You can have anything from the paper towel in the bottom to a literal, like, few cubic foot rainforest in your house.
Yeah, yeah, that's what's so fun about it.
Absolutely. And so I guess, man, where do you have a video about shipping? Or
Yeah,
so that's one other thing. At this point, somebody would need to learn about shipping, and they can watch your video about it.
yeah, yeah. That's one of those things that's also, it's gonna it goes by experience also, because there's so much there's such a big temperature gradient from where you live to where the other person lives in the midway point. So it's takes a little bit more experience and time to learn all that. But again, going back to what I said earlier, if you have if you bought an animal from me and you're to the point that you bred that animal and now you want to ship a baby, you could contact me and I would help you through it. But if you bought an animal from somebody else, contact that breeder, because chances are they are shipping and they will help you through it.
Awesome. So, circling back to what I said at the beginning about how the whole point of this conversation is kind of just been the one stop shop for somebody who's considering breeding crested geckos or another reptile, whatever, and everything someone might need to hear. So, going through this conversation, is there anything that you feel like we might be forgetting that we didn't talk about?
Uh, no, I mean you know, we did basically everything on a surface level.
Yeah.
Of course, there's still a lot more in depth that you could go, but I think as far as like after listening to this podcast, you should know, okay, this is something I want to do, or this is something I don't want to do. So that's the main objective, right?
Yeah, and I would say if you're to this point in this, you should probably go to the description and go to tikisgeckos.com and buy the wholesale baby pack so you can get some babies to start with.
And that's how I started. Honestly, that's how a lot of people start off, is by buying wholesale geckos, just because it's just the best way to do it. You're gonna get quality animals at, as cheap as possible, and you're gonna be able to see different varieties, different morphs, and you're gonna see what you like best. And then you could sell what you don't like, and then you could keep what you do like. So it's a good way to start.
Yeah.
But right now it's a great time to buy animals because everybody has a bunch of animals and everybody's doing sales, and it's very competitive right now. So if you're looking to get into crested geckos, it's a really good time right now. We haven't seen the Axanthic prices that we've seen. It had, they're the lowest they've ever been, and same with a lot of other morphs. So that's a good thing for people trying to get in.
Yeah, that's partially what made me kind of want to do this right now too is just that, like, everybody is having, Black Friday sales are coming up. There's the Halloween sales, it seems like everybody's doing right now. and
You
and the video that you just recently made about how, like, the market tanked, but that makes it kind of like one of the best times ever to be able to get, like, the best quality stuff for less of a price.
Yeah, 100%. It is the best time to get into stuff right now because the crested geckos aren't going anywhere. They're at this point, I would say the most popular pet lizard in the world, especially in the United States. But just right now, you're just seeing crazy deals. Like people are trying to get rid of geckos, and you could use that to your advantage. You could benefit from that. So it's a great time to start, especially Black Friday coming up. We do a big Black Friday sale. We do 50% off all the geckos on the website. So it's a really good time to start.
Yeah, there you go. You could get your wholesale pack and start out in a year and a half, 2 years once they grow up big enough. That's, I guess, a big thing to think about in all of it too. Is like the commitment you're making now isn't going to come to fruition for a couple of years.
Yeah, but it's like any other business. You don't, n- no business that you start is going to be profitable from the first day. It's going to take some sweat, a lot of work to eventually get it to that point.
Absolutely. You know firsthand. I mean, I know firsthand with YouTube stuff like this. It doesn't happen overnight.
Oh no.
Nothing worth doing comes easy. So, with that being said, I mean, everybody knows who you are, but where can we find you online?
Tikis Geckos on everything. All the social media is Tikis Geckos. And then www.tikisgeckos.com. We're doing our Black Friday sale. It's going to be, it's going to be really big this year. We have a lot of geckos that need new homes, and we're letting go of a lot of really amazing animals. So closer to Black Friday, we'll release more information about it too.
Cool. Well, I really appreciate your time, man. And everybody, the info for David and Tiki's Geckos is in the description. So get on it. And I will love to hear if anyone watches this 2 years from now, you making your first babies. Maybe even I'll buy one. I don't know. You know, you never know. So, with that, I appreciate everyone stopping by and hopefully we'll see you next time. Goodbye.
Thank you.